You know him as Lord Toranaga, the patient warlord, the ghost in the shadows, the man who watched every rival destroy themselves and simply waited. But Shogun gave you the ending. This is the beginning, where the ultimate mastermind of Japan started life as a disposable hostage, waiting every night to see if he'll live for another day. His name was Takechio, and before he was 7 years old, he had been traded to his family's bitterest enemies as a human hostage. Living currency, a small boy used to guarantee a political alliance his father couldn't afford to break. He was taken to the Imagawa fortress, given a room, given food, given absolutely nothing else. Historians note a habit that followed him for the rest of his life. Whenever the pressure reached its peak, whenever the choice in front of him was between two kinds of death, he bit his fingernails down to the bleeding point. Not death and survival, always death and death. Which part of himself to destroy to keep the rest alive? It started here, in an enemy castle. At 6 years old, what that child learned inside those walls would take 70 years to fully understand. He learned that sentiment is handing your enemy a weapon to use against you. He learned that patience is not weakness. It is violence with better timing. And he learned, above everything else, that the man who outlasts everyone else doesn't do it by being the strongest. He does it by being willing to pay the true cost first. To survive the tyrants of his age, to build the most stable empire Asia had ever seen, Tokugawa Ieyasu had to execute a triple funeral for his own soul. He had to die 3 separate times. He had to shed his bonds, then his pride, then the last remaining piece of his humanity. And his first death occurred in the autumn of 1579. When he realized that to protect everything he had built, he had to sign his own son's death warrant. By 1579, Tokugawa Ieyasu had survived 30 years of civil war. He had fought alongside Oda Nobunaga, the most dangerous warlord in Japan, not as an equal, but as a junior ally, a carefully managed subordinate. And for years, that arrangement had worked. Until a letter arrived at Nobunaga's camp. The letter was intercepted by Nobunaga's intelligence network. The details are disputed, the source, the content, even whether the accusation had any truth to it. What is not disputed is what happened next. Nobunaga sent word to Ieyasu. He suspected treason within the Tokugawa clan. Specifically, he suspected Ieyasu's wife, Lady Tsukiyama, of conspiring with enemy forces. And as evidence of good faith, Nobunaga required 2 things. Lady Tsukiyama was to be executed immediately, and Ieyasu's son, his heir Nobuyasu, was to be ordered to commit seppuku. Nobuyasu was 21 years old. Now, understand what is actually happening here. Nobunaga does not need this. He has no political necessity to destroy the Tokugawa bloodline at this moment. What he needs, what he is engineering, is a test. Because Nobunaga knows samurai pride. He has spent his entire career breaking it, manipulating it, weaponizing it. And he knows that if he pushes a samurai lord far enough, if he takes the thing that man loves most, the samurai lord will break. He will rage, he will rebel, and the moment Ieyasu rebels, Nobunaga has his excuse. The Tokugawa clan is erased, clean, legal, done. Ieyasu sat with that document for a long time. We don't know how long. The records don't tell us. What we know is what he did with his hands while he sat there. His veterans were outside, his generals, his most loyal men. Men who had served him since the Imagawa years. Men who had watched Nobuyasu grow from an infant into a young lord they believed in. They were waiting for his decision. They expected him to refuse. Every instinct of samurai honor, every code that the warrior class had built its identity upon, demanded that he refuse. He picked up the brush. He signed it. Then he stood up, walked to the small portrait of Nobuyasu that sat on the desk beside the scroll, a formal portrait, painted the year before, and he turned it face down on the table. He never turned it back over. When he walked out into the courtyard, his generals were weeping. Openly, without shame. Veterans who had survived 3 decades of warfare. Men who had watched brothers die on the field, standing in the autumn courtyard with tears on their faces for a 21-year-old prince they would not see again. Ieyasu walked past them. His eyes were dry. He stopped at the edge of the courtyard, and in a voice completely without emotion, he said, "Give me the autumn grain supply reports." The bonds were severed. The machine was born, and somewhere inside that machine, in whatever space remained between the gears, the 6-year-old boy in the Imagawa fortress finally understood why he had survived. Because he had been rehearsing for this moment his entire life. By 1590, Toyotomi Hideyoshi had done what no man in a century of civil war had managed. He had unified Japan. Not through noble birth, he had none. Not through samurai lineage, he was the son of a peasant. He had bought and fought and charmed and outmaneuvered every rival on the board until the board belonged entirely to him. And now he looked at Tokugawa Ieyasu, the last truly powerful warlord not completely under his thumb, and he made a decision. He stripped Ieyasu of his ancestral homelands, the Tokugawa clan's territory, the land they had held for generations, the agricultural heartland that gave them wealth and prestige and meaning, gone, redistributed. In exchange, Hideyoshi offered Ieyasu the Kanto region, 8 provinces of eastern Japan. On paper, large, in reality, undeveloped marshland, malarial coastline, and at its center, a small fishing settlement built on a swamp. That settlement was called Edo. You know it today as Tokyo. But in 1590, it was a punishment. Hideyoshi's calculation was precise. A proud samurai lord stripped of his ancestral home, exiled to a swamp, handed a consolation prize designed to humiliate, would have 2 choices: fight and die with honor, or accept and die slowly of shame. Either way, the Tokugawa problem solved itself. His generals were ready to go to war. They argued for days. The dishonor was immense. The strategic logic was worse. Moving the entire Tokugawa military apparatus across Japan, resettling tens of thousands of retainers, abandoning centuries of accumulated infrastructure. It was logistically catastrophic and politically devastating simultaneously. They expected their lord to disagree with the terms. He bowed his head. He thanked Hideyoshi for his generosity. He packed his clan and marched east. And then Tokugawa Ieyasu did something that no spy, no advisor, no rival general could have predicted or explained. He took off his robes. He walked into the mud, and he started digging. The drainage systems that would eventually make Edo one of the largest cities on earth began with Tokugawa Ieyasu standing in a swamp, digging ditches alongside farmers. Not supervising, digging. Hideyoshi's intelligence network was thorough. A spy watched from the ridge above Edo for months, documenting everything: the work crews, the construction pace, the lord himself knee-deep in farming operations. The report he sent back to the capital said in effect, "The Tokugawa wolf is toothless. He lives like a farmer. He poses no threat." The spy was a professional. He was diligent. He was completely, catastrophically wrong. What the spy saw, a broken warlord doing peasant work. What was actually happening? Ieyasu was building a hyper-efficient economic fortress in the one place in Japan where Hideyoshi's eyes weren't focused. He was constructing roads, trade networks, agricultural systems. He was making Edo not just livable, he was making it powerful, quietly, invisibly, under the cover of looking like a man who had given up. And while he built, Hideyoshi was bleeding. The Korean invasions of 1592 and 1597 were Hideyoshi's great obsession and his great disaster. He sent Japan's warlords, the men who might one day challenge him, across the sea into a grinding, unwinnable campaign that cost lives, treasure, and loyalty at a rate nobody could sustain. Ieyasu sent minimal forces. He followed orders precisely enough to avoid accusation, and he watched. Every lord who crossed to Korea came back weaker, poorer, more resentful of the man who had sent them. Ieyasu stayed in his swamp and got stronger. In 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi died. Before the body was even cold, the room began to fracture. The piece was exposed as a fragile lie, and every regent knew it. It wasn't a question of if civil war would return, but who would strike first. Hideyoshi left behind a 5-year-old heir, a council of regents to rule in the boy's name, and an empire built on ego and gold leaf with no succession plan worth the paper it was written on. He left behind a wide-open board, and Tokugawa Ieyasu was the only man still standing who understood exactly how to play it. The pride was gone. What remained was something the spy on the ridge could never have recognized, because he was looking for a warrior. He should have been looking for a ghost. After Hideyoshi's death, Japan held its breath. The Council of Regents was supposed to rule collectively until the young heir Hideyori came of age. What it actually did was begin fracturing along every existing fault line simultaneously. At the center of the fracture was Ishida Mitsunari, Hideyoshi's most devoted administrator, a man of immense organizational ability and almost no political instinct. He didn't just support the empire, he was its most devoted zealot. He positioned Hideyoshi's son as the symbol around which every Tokugawa rival could rally, and he was right to try. What Mitsunari couldn't see was what Ieyasu had been doing for 8 years in a swamp. The Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 is remembered as one of the most decisive military engagements in Japanese history. 100,000 men on each side. A single October day that determined the next 2.5 centuries. What the history books sometimes understate is that Sekigahara was won before the first arrow flew. Ieyasu spent 6 months before the battle doing what he had always done best: bribing. 3 of Mitsunari's key generals switched sides during the battle itself, a betrayal so perfectly timed it suggests considerable advance planning. The Western coalition collapsed within 6 hours. Ieyasu had not defeated his enemies. He had purchased their loyalty and waited for the investment to mature. But the war was not over, because Hideyoshi's son, Hideyori, was not dead. He was grown now, a young man, and he sat inside the walls of Osaka Castle surrounded by something Ieyasu had not anticipated. Somewhere between 90,000 and 100,000 ronin, masterless samurai, men displaced by decades of war and the settling of old scores, flowing into Osaka Castle like water finding a drain. Every man in that castle with a grudge against the new order, and there were thousands of them, had found their rallying point. Tokugawa Ieyasu was in his 70s. He had waited his entire life. He had made patience into an art form, into a weapon, into a philosophy. But even the most patient man has a timeline. And Osaka Castle was effectively impregnable. He didn't have another decade, so he thought of something else. Ieyasu deployed European artillery, not to breach the walls. The castle's defenses were too deep for that, and he knew it. But the psychological effect of this New World thunder on a population that had never heard it was exactly what he needed. The inner sanctum of the castle, where Hideyori's mother, Yotogimi, was living, was targeted specifically, not to kill her, to terrify her. It worked. Yotogimi pushed for peace talks. Ieyasu was generous. He had one condition, a reasonable one, presented as a gesture of good faith. The outer defensive moats of Osaka Castle were to be filled in. A small thing, symbolic really. A sign of trust. They agreed. Ieyasu's men worked through the night. They filled the outer moats. Then they kept working. By morning, the inner moats were gone too. Osaka Castle, the most fortified position in Japan, was now just a building. When Hideyori's advisors understood what had happened, there was nothing left to do. Ieyasu stormed the castle in the summer of 1615. He burned it to the ground. Hideyori died in the burning. His mother Yotogimi died in the burning. Every Toyotomi loyalist of consequence, dead. And then Ieyasu ordered the execution of Toyotomi Kunimatsu, Hideyoshi's grandson, 8 years old. The board was clean. He had signed his own son's death warrant to survive a monster. He killed a rival's child because he had become one. There is a version of this story where that makes him a villain. There is a version where it makes him a necessary evil. There is a version where it makes him simply the last man standing in a game where the rules were written in blood by men far worse than him. Japan would not see another civil war for 250 years. The humanity was gone. What remained built an empire. Tokugawa Ieyasu died in the spring of 1616. He was 73 years old. He had outlived Nobunaga by 34 years. He had outlived Hideyoshi by 18. He had outlived every rival, every threat, every man who had ever underestimated the patience of the ghost in the swamp. The doctors noted that in his final weeks, he was unusually calm. His fingernails had healed. For the first time in 70 years, there was nothing left to fear. Nothing left to outlast. Nothing left to become. 3 men built modern Japan. Oda Nobunaga built the road through blood and iron and absolute terror. He broke a century of chaos and died before he could see what it would become. Toyotomi Hideyoshi paved that road with gold leaf and ego and the sheer impossible force of a man who refused to accept the limits of his birth. He built a palace and left it to a child. Tokugawa Ieyasu inherited the earth. Not because he was the strongest, not because he was the most brilliant, not because fortune favored him, because he was willing to pay what it actually cost. His son, his pride, his innocence, his humanity. The question this story leaves, the one it doesn't answer, is whether the price was worth it. 250 years of peace. 1 8-year-old child. You decide. 3 men. 1 Japan. None of them saw the ending coming except the one who engineered it. Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, Ieyasu. The full story. All 3 of them, side by side. The decisions that separated them. The moment each one sealed their own fate. That's what's coming next.